Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the Northwestern Masters in Sports Administration program, I'd like to welcome you all to today's webinar. For any current students that may be joining us, I hope you had a great fall quarter, that your finals went well, and that you're looking forward to enjoying the holiday break that we have coming up. For any prospective students, I just wanted to say a few words about the program. We are a part-time evening program dedicated to helping our students learn about the vast professional opportunities that exist in this industry. The way I kind of look at it is we try to help the supply and demand issue that I think a lot of people who are looking to get into the sports industry face, and that it seems like there aren't very many jobs available and there are a ton of people who want them. So what we try to do is expose students to all of the variety of job functions, industries, companies, organizations that can support the industry to really open up the opportunities to work in sports to our students. At the same time, we try to provide course content that is going to give the students a solid point of differentiation, something that's going to set them apart, and they're educated in a way that the industry is moving, becoming experts in the field, so that, again, when you go to apply for jobs in the industry, that our students can stand out a bit. Our program consists of 6 core courses, as well as 3 electives, and there's also a leadership class and a capstone project or thesis that rounds out our program. We are launching a new sports analytics specialization, which is in conjunction with the predictive analytics program at Northwestern, and only for this specialization, those courses are online. Just about all of the other courses in this program are on-ground typical courses that take place, again, in the evenings. We are constantly innovating the course content because, again, we really want to give our students a competitive advantage and the tools that they need for a successful career. 2 other components that I think really distinguish our program as well is the great Northwestern brand and family that we're a part of. Additionally, we are located in what I think has to be one of the most sports-saturated cities in the world, which provides really tremendous networking and job experience opportunities for our students. So with that, I'd like to introduce one of our outstanding faculty members. Dan Migala has been a member of the program, an instructor in the program for a number of years, definitely a student favorite, and he is here to introduce our very special guest today. So with this, I'll turn it over to Dan.
Well, thanks so much, Beth. I'm honored to be here. Actually, what's now an annual tradition, I think, doing our Northwestern webinar from the baseball winter meetings. We're actually here in San Diego. With me is the Chief Marketing Officer of Minor League Baseball and also the President of Minor League Baseball Enterprises, Michael Hand. Welcome.
Hey there, guys. How are you? Pleasure to be here. Probably a little warmer outside here in San Diego than it is where many of you guys are watching. So sorry to say that out loud, but it is 70 degrees and sunny in San Diego today.
Yeah, no sign of Ron Burgundy just yet, but you know, tough job to be a weatherman here in San Diego.
Yes.
You know, Michael, I think what we'll get started on is you know, obviously in your current role in minor league baseball, I think a lot of the students would, you know, one day aspire to have that type of role and responsibility. But, you know, they're really just kind of starting out in their career. Would love to get some, you know, maybe career path from the beginning of your career. I can kind of chime with some questions, and certainly, you know, for the students in the audience, you know, you can post questions on the control panel, and we'll try to get to as many of those in the time that we have today. So, going back, we'll hop in the DeLorean, right? Go back in time a little bit to, you know, when you were a student, when you started out your career, what was that first job like, and kind of give us a, you know, almost like a timeline, if you will, of how you got here.
Sure. You know, sports for me was always a passion. It was always something I wanted to be connected to when I could. The career path to get here for me was probably somewhat unique than other folks that you would talk to. Turn way back, date myself here a little bit. You know, I was always an athlete as a kid and growing up, and I had the opportunity to play football in college up at Colgate University, fine school up in New York State, for those of you. But I enjoyed my time at Colgate. When I came out of Colgate, I really didn't know what I wanted to do yet. I was trying to figure things out. But one thing really struck me was when I was a junior at Colgate, going into my senior year, I had the opportunity to do an internship at BMW North America, and I worked in their corporate communications department. I spent the summer, Dan, primarily doing press releases and chasing down press releases and putting together media kits and whatever else they asked me to do. But I got exposed really to marketing for the first time in that sense. I had always done summer jobs, waiting tables, being a camp counselor, the typical things high school kids do for jobs into college. And it opened my eyes to the marketing side more. And part of me, I think there was always this creative kind of spark that I liked the idea of having a physical product or something we sold and trying to convince people they wanted it. Like put that story together, be a storyteller, and put that model together. But at the end of the day, personally as an athlete and someone who's just a tremendous sports fan, I always was hoping I could find a way to bridge it back to sports. I was fortunate enough that after my internship, when I finished up school, I came back after I graduated, and I got hired back actually by the folks at BMW. My first job right out of school was I worked in their management training program, and I took 3 or 4 different positions. But knowing I wanted to be around sports, I was fortunate, and I'm truly going to date myself here, is the Olympic Games were coming up in Atlanta. And we were running the torch relay event where BMW and Coca-Cola would bring the torch across the country to get to Atlanta. And I had the opportunity, in my mind, to be connected to sports in some way, and I volunteered in any way, shape, or form to be part of the program. So my first real exposure to that was, from a marketing perspective, was I worked in a lot of the plotting and the planning and the mapping of how that course was going to work with our agency at the time. So again, it was a marketing function, event-oriented, but it gave me a connection to sports that I was intrigued by. And as I kind of advanced in my career, I always sort of looked for those windows. I definitely made a few stops along the way. I moved out to the Midwest, and I work at General Motors. And at General Motors, I did a lot of advertising and media for some big brands. But I also worked closely with Buick. I did a lot of golf programming and worked with Tiger Woods and golf events.
Can I ask one? And I'll interrupt you a few times. But I think what's really interesting too is when you talk about that experience at BMW. A lot of the students are looking at initially some internship, opportunities, or one of the great things about Northwestern is it is primarily a part-time evening program. So the flexibility for students to gain work experience in a great sports town like Chicago, but then the bridge from a internship to a full-time job. Any in hindsight looking back to, that's. Obviously, you did a great job that they brought you on full time. It's the highest compliment they could pay you. But looking back at kind of maneuvering through that path.
Yeah, it's interesting because when you go through that time, when I mentioned the camp counselor thing, the other job I always had when I was in high school is I was a janitor for the local elementary school. Right? They clean all the desks, empty out the classrooms. I got paid like $15 an hour or some crazy number. And with all my high school buddies, I was the guy who had money. Like I was the guy in college, it was beer money or whatever else it was. Right? So it was great. From the internship perspective, I will tell you though, whenever you have the opportunity to work in an environment, even if it's unpaid or whatever that balance is for school credit, I think it's really critical you try to get that exposure to those kind of organizations, primarily because from a resume perspective, it certainly shows your ability and understanding of what it's like to work in a larger organization. I think it shows you that you understand that there's policies, procedures, way to work through things. And more so than anything else, it's just the connections it opens for you, the relationships you can draw. For me, yes, I was fortunate I got hired back. But as I was about to say, I jumped to 2 or 3 other companies after I left there. And there were still folks who I would use as references or as my immediate connections who I remember from my first internship. And a lot of what they would talk about when folks would call and follow up as a reference was, I remember when Michael was hungry and young and was willing to do anything. And having those folks in your sort of bandwidth of people you can count on and talk to, they become great friends for the rest of your life, but also they become really great professional resources when you're a 24-year-old kid or a 23-year-old kid at the time, and you start to build this, mentorship with a gentleman who is well advanced from what I had ever done, in their 50s or whatever it might be, being able to open those other doors for you and just create connections. I think it's a critical, important point of success to really build out.
Yeah, and that's on the career path too. Sometimes you're focused on the destination as opposed to the journey, right?
Yeah.
And that's a critical step. So so you after BMW, you went to
BMW,
General Motors.
I went to General Motors. I was out in the Midwest for a while. From General Motors, I went to the Miller Brewing Company. Everybody knows they're involved in sports, so clearly there was a lot of stuff from an active perspective there. But I worked in Milwaukee. I oversaw promotional programming and development. So I wasn't the guy writing the contract with the business partner, but when the contract was signed, myself and my team were the group that brought to life for a variety of brands across our portfolio. And ultimately, I'm an East Coast guy. I wanted to get back to the East Coast, and my wife and I relocated back to Hershey, Pennsylvania. I took a job at the Hershey Company. In a similar capacity, I was there when we started our NCAA relationship. We had a NASCAR deal. But I oversaw promotions and sponsorship and in-store retail activation. So it was on one day I was doing the Batman movie for the Reese's Peanut Butter Cups, and the next day I might have been doing a NASCAR programmer cooking s'mores in the lobby of somewhere. Not a bad job, actually. Beers, candy, and automobiles, kind of like all of life's vices over a couple of years.
Well, let's talk about that too, because I think when we think back on ourselves, when we were, at the undergrad or graduate school age, right? We had a passion, wanted to work for sports, and you might think of that in the definition of more of the current role that you have of working on the team side, the league side. But you just joked auto, beer, and candy, but you also really got to work with golf, NASCAR, NCAA, NFL, MiLB. I mean, all those that they have the partnerships. As you went along your way, you're very much a part of the sports industry, but without being under the framework of a team, right?
You're absolutely right. And I think that's, again, to the group here, as far as what you guys are looking at in career endeavors and where you go. That is one thing I would clearly outline, is that jobs on the surface, when you define where you work, it's not necessarily working for a team or a league or an agency that does sports 24/7. There's a lot of things, if sports is a passion of yours, that you can still be connected to. And as I alluded to, whether it was the Olympic program, I worked on pro beach volleyball for a year with BMW motorcycles. It was one of them, obviously, clearly a fun summer on beaches around the country when you're 20-something years old. But, that's, I think, an opportunity, too, where I would say don't overshoot the expectation, too, of understanding that within where you're looking, there could be avenues that you can carve out to create that experience for yourself. And again, I know it's very cliche to say, raise your hand, volunteer, be a part of every program. It's cliche for a reason. It's become a cliche for a reason because it's very valid. I think if folks challenge themselves and look for windows of opportunity to include themselves in programs and you become a go-to, it clearly can open a lot of doors. But again, I don't think when you look at sports, you should be so narrow-cast just to think of a team and league perspective, but also thinking much broader of all the folks who have to activate against it, all of the groups who use sports as a tool to connect with their brand to fans or consumers. There's a lot of opportunity there that sometimes gets mismanaged or misthought through.
What about, though, like the heartbeat of culturally, internally with those brands, right? Because you don't necessarily, it's not the same working for the Los Angeles Dodgers or the New York Yankees or, the team side, but you're very much a part of sports. I mean, the brand executives that you work with, the line is now, those are the people when you were on the brand side that write the checks. So that's an incredible learning tool, but also an open-mindedness that you are part of the industry, maybe without being in that, set team structure too.
Well, it's funny you said it. Selfishly, for me, I think what makes me better at my job today, and I like to think I'm pretty good at what I do. There's days that are probably debatable. We could save that for another conversation or webinar. But I think one thing that's probably most prepared me for where I am today, and this is, again, just advice broadly, is being well-rounded and understanding to look at things from different perspectives and different eyes. For me, I left one step out before I got to this job, and the bridge between working for the Hershey Company and me working in minor league baseball was I spent a 4-year stint working for IMG. I spent 2 years in New York working in global consulting and then 2 years working in their college division. And there were a lot of folks who were instrumental in me making that transition. Part of it was I wanted to be more immersed in sports full time. So as much as I talked about working on the brands, there was always a component of P&Ls and production and manufacturing and how much the cost of cocoa was at a given time as far as how we were going to do programming. And I wanted to be even more immersed in the sports side. The thing that was great about what IMG opened the door to me was, and why I was appealing to them, was being well-rounded, right? So for me, and for what they saw in me, is I like the opportunity now that if tomorrow we get off, this, and we were to have a conversation with a brand partner, I can say I've been in their shoes. I can say that I've walked their life a little bit, and I can understand it. So yes, I worked in chocolate, or I worked in automobiles. But if tomorrow I had a meeting with Procter & Gamble and I was talking about laundry detergent for Tide, I wouldn't necessarily feel uncomfortable because I think I at least understand and I've got enough of a background to comprehend what that business model looks like. And I think that's one thing I would advise everybody who's looking at pursuits in sports is that as you tell your personal story, as you write a resume and you think about the reflection it is of you, is thinking about how there's connection points between what you've already done. So it might not be apples to apples, but you might very strongly be able to make those connections back to the process, the orientation, the touch points of it. And I think people lose sight of that. And sometimes I know when I interview others and I talk about their interest in sports, this is going to sound terrible, but they want to be in it for the wrong reasons. It just sounds cool to go to games every night. That's not a good reason to be involved in sports. Crap, it's a lot harder than that. I think we know that. But when you're able to say that I want to work in sports and I want to build up the sport in the league, how? I've worked on brands, and here's how I've built brands. I want to connect with fans. How? The same way I did it by trying to sell peanut butter cups in Walmart. Like, there's a way to connect those dots and stories. And I think that as everybody builds their personal resume and their personal background, certainly have a goal and a vision of where you want to go, but thinking about how you're grasping everything of your current opportunity to build towards it.
And you're a sum of your life experiences too. So even from a personal side, and that's what I like about grad school too, is where your undergrad specialty was kind of defines maybe a foundation. For myself, actually, I was a journalism major undergrad, and now working with you in minor league baseball, I really have had comments from people that you are almost a sponsorship storyteller. It's kind of innate, in my DNA, but I would have disagree, right?
You're spot on. It's funny. Please, no one go look up my transcript at Colgate University. You will not be overly impressed with my grade point average. I spent a little too more time with the 3 bars in Hamilton, New York that we had. But I will tell you, though, that I changed majors a couple times, and I finished up with an education degree at Colgate. And my fallback plan after football and whatever else was going to happen was, I don't know, maybe I'll go teach, right?
Yeah.
I'll be a high school social studies teacher or something. And, so again, you don't know where life is going to take you, and I think you take risks and you work towards things. But to that point, it's funny, you talk about journalism major, you're a storyteller. I talk about doing student teaching. I'm still an educator, right? In a lot of ways, you still use those life experiences personally. And again, I'm going to exaggerate to prove a point, but even if you're waiting tables right now part-time, there's a customer service aspect you have to learn and get better at and work with. And that's why I think maximizing the career opportunities you have in front of you and using those to build who you are and project who you are just become a critical component of what makes up your DNA.
Yeah, I like to also think about it. I mean, you mentioned some other things about you personally, playing football. I mean, LinkedIn, from a relationship standpoint, is so easy for all the students to be able to do that. Let's say you play tennis in high school, and you find people that play tennis that have a job, and that connective tissue, because you probably see the world in the same set of eyes.
You do, and it goes back to your storytelling comment a minute ago as well. I think, and this is not a conversation to talk about how to interview and do interviews, but to your point, drawing that connective tissue is important. I talk a lot of times I go back to Colgate every year, and I talk to students there. They do a job fair kind of program, and we do sort of mock interviews, and we talk through things. And someone will send me a resume, and I'll notice that this young lady will be on the tennis team. And we'll go through a mock interview, and she'll never mention that she played tennis. And we'll get to the end, and I said, okay, I want to talk about a couple things I noticed on here that you didn't highlight. And I'm like, how come you mentioned tennis? She's like, well, we were talking about working for P&G, or a mock interview for a brand. I said, but what tennis tells me is you know what it's like to work on a team. You know what it's like to commit to hard work. You know what it's like to get up early and train. You know what it's like to spend extra time on the weekends and sacrifice what you have to do. Think about your personality and think about the experiences you have, the clubs you're a part of, fraternities, sororities, whatever it is. Don't overemphasize it, but the fact that you can at least have some ability to relate to it on a time management perspective or a career development perspective, there are ideas from that you can draw out and build on. I do get frustrated when somebody wants to talk the entire interview about $2,000 they raised for a sorority fundraiser. And I appreciate that. But that maybe isn't as much connected, but the value proposition, the mindset of how you think will come through. And I always encourage folks to find those touch points. And you mentioned LinkedIn. Do your homework right before you walk in. You get a sense of who these people are, what their background is, and you might find out that you live in the same city, or you know somebody from a third-degree connection, or you both share interest in tennis, right? Yeah. And I think that's a way to build rapport.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think we're at IMG in your career path. So for the students, I mean that was a jump. You went from essentially the brand side to now the consulting side, and what was that change like of kind of seeing it maybe through the other side of the negotiating table?
Yeah, it's definitely a different lens. And from a career perspective, I had spent at that point 15 to 17 years clearly on the client side, and you made the comment earlier. I was writing the check. Okay, it's kind of nice to be invited to events and write the check. Suddenly I was the guy hosting at events, crossing my fingers they'd write a check back, and trying to sell it. So again, I think I used my experiences in different ways to try to get there, but it's a different set of challenges and a different mindset. I will tell you that on the brand side, it felt more traditional. It felt more 9 to 5. It felt like there was a business model you were working towards. And certainly things change, and you have to be flexible and work around things. But when I really went to the agency side, and again, for those of you thinking about a sports career, even on the league or team side, you live and die almost day to day, right? There's a lot of things about the weather or tomorrow's attendance or where things shift. Political things that are going around the world can dramatically change your approach. So when I was at IMG, I worked heavily on a lot of the Olympic Committee work. We did a lot of global programming there. And you start thinking about world security and world finances come into play as far as how you think about things. When I was in Hershey, Pennsylvania, working on 2 brands, I didn't think as globally in my spectrum of how it came together. It becomes a very different touch point. And also the big difference was my responsibility became much more of being a conduit of activity. It wasn't necessarily all on me. I didn't ultimately own what was happening in a lot of cases, but I had to make sure both sides were connecting the dots and the end result still delivered results. And for me, selfishly, it was challenging. Not that I want to be a control freak, and you know this a little bit, but relinquishing some of that control that, oh crap, I brought these 2 parties together to do a business deal, and I ultimately don't own either side. I'm just trying to make sure everyone's happy. For some of us, I'm sure many of you on the phone are like me, it became a challenge at times that I didn't control the entire end result, but yet I certainly was trying to make sure the end result was a positive one. Yeah. That was difficult for me personally.
Yeah, so, but also too, you didn't stay stagnant, right? You continue to grow in your development, and I mean, I think about like Joe Montana, famous quote of, I think he was asked if he ever gets nervous, and he says, if you don't have butterflies, you're not growing. Right, and I think that same kind of athlete mentality in your career, is very admirable. So then you went, after the consulting side, to I think a real exciting venture that IMG launched as well.
Yeah, the IMG situation was really great for me personally. IMG is clearly a worldwide agency, and I got to meet folks from around the globe, and I worked on a lot of broad international projects for a couple of years, and it was really exciting. But at the time, IMG made the acquisition, I'm sure many of you guys know or have studied this, in the college sports marketing space. IMG was really trying to change the design of how sports marketing was looked at. So much like other leagues have always had a governing body and organization, yes, there was the NCAA, but that didn't really take care of the schools individually. So IMG and Learfield and some other guys got much more involved in the marketing aspect of that. So I was there when IMG had 10 colleges and had purchased ISP out of Winston-Salem, and basically overnight went from 10 to 80. And it was a tremendous shift. And it was really, again, tying in a lot of what we've talked about already. For me, it was an exciting opportunity because one thing that's always motivated me, and we're going to segue, I guess, to catch up to where I am in my career today. One thing I've always been motivated by is I like that storyteller aspect. I like to be able to build a platform, massage a platform, do the back end to put your story together. And what I loved about my IMG college experience was, as challenging as it was to convince the world that 10 to 80 was a good situation, within 80, there's a lot of power in what we do. You had to really be a storyteller, but a storyteller internally and externally. And that's the thing I think a lot of folks lose sight of, is the political notion even internally in sports. In that situation, it also meant going to these 80 colleges, again, to buy into our philosophy, because colleges still independently want to do their own thing. And jumping ahead to where I am in minor league baseball now, we have 160 teams. We cover 77 of the top 100 U.S. markets. And with 160 teams, as you can only imagine, there are big clubs in the AAA levels and really small clubs that that range in the rookie leagues. So I go from Columbus to Batavia, you like Batavia, to Toledo and El Paso and Charlotte, which is a brand new ballpark. Back to small little areas and nooks of Tennessee that I don't think many people have ever been to. And trying to really tell a holistic story can be a challenge, but trying to get all 160 of them, much like on the college side, all 90 of them, to buy into your ultimate vision and be a part of what you want to do becomes part of that background training, being a storyteller and putting it together.
And an internal sell as much as an external.
Absolutely.
Right.
So, and that's, I think, what people often lose sight of is that it sounds sexy and glamorous in sports. It's about game night, it's about sponsorship, but external partners. There's still a lot of behind-the-scenes work that happens internally just to get to that point, right? Putting that story together. And in my world today, and I know we've kind of shifted in the conversation, but I went to minor league baseball. Organization's been for 110 years. Never had a chief marketing officer in 110 years. So to come in, it wasn't as if they had no understanding of marketing. It's just that we usually relied on the clubs to tell their own stories. So for us to come back now and say, hey, hold on a second, pump the brakes for a minute. We want to start building a national story over the top of it. To 150 of the 160, that sounds great. To 10 of them, it was like, wait a second, exactly, how is this going to change my world? So I think you're always doing also that political sort of game a bit, and politics is probably the wrong way to say it, but certainly the relationship game of the role you play in the larger scheme of things, and understanding where you fall in that, that swing of the pendulum or in that shift is really critical in understanding where you want to go for success.
Yeah, but I think so many of the students, whether it's in class or forums like this, want to get into this business to do remarkable things. And I think about what you accomplished at IMG College of really creating a new national marketing platform for schools like University of Michigan, Texas. I mean, these are iconic programs, right, that have really been around for a long time. And now doing that with minor league baseball, right. You're not resting on the status quo, so to speak, and just kind of executing a game plan. You're basically building your own West Coast offense, right? Yeah,
you are. And I think what excites me about it, and I think what excites a lot of other people, is I was always somebody who wanted to be involved in the development process. I like a beginning, a middle, and an end, right? It's hard sometimes jumping midstream to a project and don't feel like you have ownership or creation ability in it. I like to think of myself as someone who can coach and teach and build and mold and be that storyteller. So for me, to take a step back and look for a way to evolve it and develop it just really excites me, because it allows me to use a variety of skills I've built over my life, but also just personal passion points of mine to kind of get there. So that kind of piece of it really is enthusiastic to me. And there is a component of maybe at times doubt or question, but when you really walk in, you think about the collective behavior, the collective ability, in a very detailed way. What we really want to be able to do is, rather than have a corporation go and sell or buy door to door, to come to us and say, I want to buy the entire footprint, is a very powerful thing. But it's also about understanding and being able to explain to the folks you work with why it's a value to them. It can't be self-serving. And I think no matter how you look at it, you have to be, and again, it gets back to even just my days as an athlete, you're part of a team, right? I played defensive back. I had a job. I had one role, right? But if I fail and I give a touchdown pass over my head, the other 10 guys in the field are pissed, not to mention the 11 guys in offense now have to work twice as hard to get the points back. So you always play a role no matter what that role is, and I think defining what that role is, contributing in some way. Not everyone gets to set the policy. Some guys have to activate it and do it. But understanding, I think, and asking the right questions and being inquisitive. I love when folks ask why, to a degree, right? But I love when folks want to understand why. Don't just take things at face value and run through the wall to execute. Taking a second to step back and say, well, why exactly are we doing this, allows you to say, okay, now I get where it fits in the big picture, and I have a better sense of why I'm being asked to do what I'm doing. And I think it's a really critical thing, just personally, as you guys explore and think about who you want to be and where you're going. Understanding why you're doing what you're doing is just as much as doing it effectively.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. And that why component of it, I think, is how you discover new opportunities, right?
Sure.
So let's talk about minor league baseball. We're here at the winter meetings. We're going to maybe ask you to give kind of a summary of some of the things that go on here, give the students some perspective there. But, you do have a 110-year-old organization. You've got 160 teams, 42 million fans come through the turnstiles every year, which is, I'm correct on this, it's more than the NBA, NHL, and NFL and MLS combined?
Maybe not combined, but yeah, close. Certainly
So,
any combination of three of them. Yes.
And then there was no national platform, right, before, and somebody asked the question, why? Why doesn't the league have a national structure?
Sure.
What was that like, when you were interviewing for this position? What was that like in kind of determining, one, why we should do this, and also then bridging, I think that's a great lesson for the students, right? Once you've asked why, then connecting that with how, right?
Yeah. There's phases I think you go through in the process, right? So I go through the interview process, and I'm just I'm excited. I think this is great. I love the idea of, again, shaping and molding the clay. But, you start to understand why didn't the role exist? Asking the questions about, am I really eyes wide open understanding the challenges in front of me of what I'm trying to build or what I'm trying to get to? So a lot of work goes into sort of doing the piece on that. But then also and being very candid and honest on that day one when you're in the office and you kind of get that first call of somebody who doesn't see it your way. And you kind of take a deep breath. And it's kind of that, oh shit, what did I sign up for kind of moment. It is a real moment, right, that happens where you take that deep breath and you're kind of like, okay, but how are we going to work through it, right? How are we going to build consensus? It's just kind of part of the process. So to me, it was really about any other kind of project. Whether it was a school project you're working on as a group project, it was a matter of breaking it down into compartments, right? Breaking it down into pieces and what were the phases or the pieces of what we wanted to do. So early on, and what we really identified was we need to be clear on what the mission was. We need to explain what the power was in our brand. So again, tapping into personal history, I went back to my old days of working on Reese's Peanut Butter Cups for Miller Lite, and it was we need to build a brand plan, we need to build a brand strategy, right? What are the fundamental anchor bullet points of data or strategy that are going to frame up who we are? And being able to put together in a cohesive deck that tells a story, storytelling component comes through again, about who you want to be, it's kind of where you see yourself in your vision, and then walking folks through that and getting folks to sort of make a shift. And it's also being consistent and being firm and having confidence in where you are. I'm all for adaptability, and you have to be ready for change because change happens every moment. It happened this weekend while we're here, But in the same breath, I think you need to be strong in your convictions. And when you're strong in your convictions and believe in what you believe in, as you tell that story and put together that mission, you start to build followers. And it takes time. But for us with 160 clubs, you can only imagine, you get 20 on board, and 20 becomes 40, and 40 becomes 80, and so ultimately, hopefully, 80 becomes 160. So for us, it's really been about being consistent and true to our message and our strategy, not wavering, because you have to believe in what you're doing. And I think if we wavered 6 months in or 12 months in, I don't think we ever would have regained traction and control. We had to have strong belief in who we were, and that's kind of the model we followed through. And a great example is we're at the winter meetings right now. I think it's a really beautiful day outside, by the way. But we're in the winter meetings now, and I spent yesterday, we have 14 individual leagues that ladder up to the 160 clubs. I spent time in the last days with 11 of the 14 leagues. In every one of those leagues, I start off by the first thing I say is, I want to remind you of what we promised you on the day one when we started. And it's just a matter of staying grounded in the principles and the foundation of where we are, and then walk through what's changed and what's been modified. But staying committed to our vision is really important. Now listen, if things fail miserably, you have to know when to make change and adjust. But in the same breath, if you are really still strongly, firmly grounded in what you were trying to do, you need to stay committed to kind of where you want to go.
I mean, it's no different than when a new head coach comes in to a college football team,
sure.
Or some of the changes that go through from personnel. This is the goal, this is the vision, stay the course, and we'll execute, right?
And listen, and it's a great analogy, actually, if you talk even college football for a second and use Northwestern as an example. You have a head football coach who came through the system and understood what the importance was at that university to what that organization meant and what it meant to him personally, right? So he was personally grounded. He had a personal interest in the sake of success. And I think that comes through when he recruits or talks to players or he's involved. You get other organizations where I think it becomes a turnstile of coaching, and that style of offense changes every year. The recruiting dynamic changes every year. They might find blips of success, but you tend to get a 10-2 season followed by a 4-8 season as they go through those learning curves and trying to recruit all new players, and then they get blown out. And I think that, again, it is very similar in an analogy to say that when you're committed to a vision or you have some continuity, there's strength in that, and people can believe in that and have faith in that. It's not that blind faith and no direction that you know isn't going to be successful. You need to know when to adapt and shift. But when you can do that and have some semblance of continuity, I just think it's really important because it breathes life into the folks who are following that overall presence.
Yeah. So we're here at the meetings then. You started out really asking the question, why and how, coming from your interview 18 months ago, right on my timeline.
Yeah.
You were one of the featured presenters at the opening session, and you're announcing now 3 new partnerships. Really kind of seeing the model come to fruition. Just on a personal level, what did that feel like to that was one of your aha moments, right?
Yeah, it was definitely Kanye dropped the mic moment for a second. I was pretty fired up about it, actually. Listen, the sales process, and if it's sponsorship or anything else, it can be a difficult and long one. And that's the other thing I think people need to realize is that if you're looking in sports to get a job and you think and expect instant gratification, you might be out the wrong industry, okay? Because it's not always instant gratification. It's not just about wins and losses on the field. There's a lot of other pieces that come with it. You have to plod. You have to work hard. You got to tell your story. And I think that that's one thing, again, it's a life lesson. I talk to my kids about this, right? It's a life lesson. You need to fail sometimes, right, to kind of learn and get better. So for us, this was a really big moment for us to announce 3 new national partnerships. It was proof that our vision wasn't crazy. It was proof that it could be done and can go there. Now the hard work starts on activating it and making it a true case study of being successful. And then you look, 3 sponsors become 6, and 6 becomes 12. But in that same sort of motif, as you talk through it, you need to be willing to fail. And we spent, and you know this firsthand, we spent a lot of time in the conference room trying to explain and tell your story, where I think we got folks to understand who we were, but not everyone was biting, not everyone wanted to buy into it. But there's certainly a level of satisfaction where you can take a deep breath for that moment and enjoy it. At least you hope to, before you go to the next stage. But you also can't lose sight of the hard work it took to get there, and then the activation element to kind of get there. It's a really short window of feeling great about it, because you now have to go back and bring it to life. And it's been an interesting process to go through.
Yeah, and I think some of the people that I admire most in this industry are not afraid to fail. And it's something, for the students, that we don't talk about really enough.
Yeah.
Mike Fack is a mentor and a friend, but he uses the concept of fail forward. Learn from it, move ahead. Don't feel your losses in the same way that an athlete does too, right?
Yeah.
But there's value in that.
There's a lot of value in that. I talked to my professional career earlier, and when I worked at the Miller Brewing Company, they had just gone through an acquisition with South African Brewery, and there became a very strong international influence in what we were doing. And the new CEO and president was a guy named Norman Adaman, and Norman had this thick accent, and he was so strong in his convictions when he spoke. And he used to use the phrase "fail forward" all the time. And we had this mentality, and it was rooted in the book "Eating the Big Fish." It was all about being a challenger brand. He loved the fact that Miller Lite was number 2 to Bud Light, because in his mind, that gave Miller Lite so many opportunities to take chances and go try to punch the big guy in the nose a little bit and try to draw some attention to it. But he would always talk about failing forward, and he would talk a lot about the fact that if you haven't done something at the end of the day that made you a little bit uncomfortable, you haven't worked hard, you're not pushing yourself hard enough. And I again, it's one of those life lessons, I think, that I know we try to integrate into our business that. And again, minor league baseball is a bit unique. I know a lot of folks who've been to games, hopefully, and if you haven't, please get out and do it. We're a different experience, right? I talk a lot about when I go to a sporting event, if you guys are at a Bears game, for 3 hours, you're leaning in. You're like, holy crap, right? Every moment of the game, it's action-packed, and you're yelling at Cutler, and you're yelling at Brandon Marshall, and telling him to get up off the turf, whatever it might be. But you're ingrained for 3 hours. And now when it's halftime or between quarters, you just kind of lean back and take a deep breath. And you're like, wow, that's exhausting. For minor league baseball, 3 hours of it is kind of leaning back. It's a conversation. It's fun. When you're leaning in is that between inning thing, when that mascots are racing or things are happening. So for us in those lean in moments, we control that story, right? That's our time to shine. That's not about rules and regulations. That's about emotional connection and creating memories. So I always tell our guys, like, that's where you want to push the envelope and try to do some new things. Now we have the benefit of 72 home games throughout the season. On a couple of those nights, try something that makes you painfully uncomfortable and see what it leads to. And certainly some guys have probably pushed it too far. But it opens up doors maybe to really great ideas that otherwise might have been left on a whiteboard in a conference room, not been explored. And we encourage that.
Yeah, I also think even for students, that's the time to kind of dream big and think about it with your project and you're really thinking big. Maybe they have the structure to be able to do that, even more than a working professional too.
I think you do. And again, what I always talk to a lot of folks about, and I always look for this again in the interview process when I talk to folks, I like to get a comprehension of how they think, right? Are you an ideas person? And I think if you have the ability to develop ideas, think big, think open, that's a strength that every organization is looking for folks who can sort of challenge the status quo a little bit. Now, ideas for the sake of ideas aren't always worth a lot. They've got to be grounded in fact and substantiated. But the willingness to kind of peel away the onion and observe, right? My wife absolutely refuses to go shopping with me. Not that I love going shopping, but I'm a big fan of, the Saturday or Sunday, the kids are in the car, we're going to Target for God knows what the hell we need. I could spend 2 hours right in the store. I look at all random crap. I'm looking at how things are displayed. I'm looking at different things. I look at it through a completely different filter. It doesn't make me any better or worse than the next guy. I just know my mind's always racing, and I'll be the idiot there, pull out my phone and text myself a note or take a picture of a shelf display because it might spark something. There's been days I go home and have no idea why I have a picture of dog food display on my phone. But in the same breath, I like just to, you never know where you're going to find ideas, right? And they tend to hit you at obscure times. You're on vacation, you're doing something, you're out, you're about, you're with your friends, you're in a moment of maybe being overserved from a bartender, and if your friend makes a sarcastic comment, but it triggers a thought, right? You never know where those ideas come from. So for me, it's just never turning it off. You're kind of always on. And when you're in sports or you're in marketing, to be really honest with you, it's not a 9-to-5 job, right? And you guys, I think everyone has to understand that. You kind of never turn it off, right? You wake up in the morning, you're kind of thinking about it. I don't care if it's when you're in the shower, you're brushing your teeth, whatever it might be. Things will trigger ideas that kind of lead to other ideas. And I would encourage everyone to continue to be that sort of dreamer. And again, it sounds cliche, but think big and be able to look for where those ideas can come from.
Yeah, well, let's talk about it. We got about probably 5-10 minutes left, but advice that you have. I mean, if you know now, or if you could go back and know then what you know now, and you're even a student at Northwestern, you're maybe an undergrad thinking about going to Northwestern, who has a desire to work in sports administration, sports marketing, sports business. What advice do you have? What should they be, even on a more personal level, what should they be thinking about as well?
Listen, I think there's a couple things honestly to think about. And the folks from Northwestern are in a very unique situation. First of all, it's a great program and a great school. And I think that's something not to lose sight of. And I think the network that you can build through Northwestern and the folks you can connect with outside of it is going to be critical to your future success as well. So I wouldn't take that lightly. What I would say is, some of the things really to focus on and think about as you go through it is maximizing those personal experiences that you have, those touch points, whether it be with people or professors or even just folks you engage with through the situation. Think about that, think about that LinkedIn connection and where it can go long term, right? But for me, I would argue, never lose the aspect of being curious. Never lose the aspect of challenging yourself. And those are sort of two phrases I really try to live by, especially when I think about it. Being curious to the extent that don't accept everything completely at face value. You have an opportunity where you are in a collegiate setting or an educational setting to probe and go deeper and ask questions and push. And I think that's a really thing to be curious about why things work the way they do and how. I look back on my career and early on, not that I want to undo or redo things, but I think at times I did probably get complacent and accept things for how they were. And I knew I had strong mentors who would not have remotely been offended had I pulled them aside and said, can you take 10 extra minutes to explain to me exactly why I'm doing what I'm doing? But instead I just said, okay, shit, I'll run through the wall because you told me to run through the wall, versus really understanding what role it played in the big picture. So be curious, ask the questions, get more foundation around why you do it. And then the idea around challenging yourself is to push yourself outside your comfort zone. I mean, listen, I'm not an artistic guy, a creative guy, and any agency who's ever worked with me hates it when I sketch something on the back of a napkin or tries to read my handwriting. But, challenge yourself and push yourself outside your comfort zone, because I don't necessarily want to have the answer, but if I can help other folks get me to the answer, it's a success. And too many folks are looking for, I think, the individual pat on the back, the self, like it's my moment, every kid gets a trophy. We're part of a team. Be a part of something bigger. Know your role, contribute it. But at the end of the day, be proud of being part of a group that presents something that's a success. I'd much rather be in a setting where 2 nights ago, we had 15 people out for dinner celebrating a new partnership. Everyone in that room played a role in getting the partnership done. That's equally, if not more important to me than the one individual saying, look what I did, right? I want the trophy or I want the sticker, So for me, that's the other stuff I would just think about as you guys go through that career process and explore. Really think about being curious. Think about how you're going to challenge yourself. Think about the team setting. and think about how you can engage in that environment.
Yeah. So, and even more exciting time in our industry. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of changes going on with technology. I mean, Northwestern's really at the forefront of using analytics on the sports business side. What are some changes that you see in our industry, in the next couple of years that, maybe they could get a head start on, or, just to further advance their career, to anticipate maybe what our business is going to look like in 2017?
A couple things, honestly. First and foremost, you're right. The technology world has changed dramatically, and it's really changed the game. And again, I'm dating myself here, but there was certainly a time and place where it was hard to be connected as we are today, and it was hard to replicate a program in market A versus market B. With the way things work now, and the seamless nature of whether it's being in the cloud or the beacon system in stadiums and all the other kind of pieces that come with the tech side of the world, everybody is so interconnected. Everything happens in real time, right? So, on the forefront of that is I would continue to always stay in tune with sort of where that technology shift is going, right? I'm a big fan of, I subscribe to numerous newsletters. Do I get and read all of them every day? No, but it's just, I'm not necessarily going to say that SBJ and those kind of worlds are sort of the Bible of sports, but it is really good to know what deals are getting done, where things are happening in real time, and again, probing deeper, understanding it. The other thing for you guys at Northwestern, it's a huge opportunity for you, is that while yes, the world is becoming sort of flat, and the guy in Batavia maybe has the same exposure some folks in the big city do, you do have Chicago as a network, and Chicago by nature provides a much bigger playground to play in, and there's a lot of professional sports teams there and leagues there, agencies there, clients there. The opportunities of just having that ability to rub shoulders and to connect and to build that sort of rapport with a broader universe of folks who can become sort of in your contingent to help moving forward is something I wouldn't underestimate. Yeah. But I would say certainly focus a lot more on that technology side, where that whole sector is going, and just be up to speed on things. And the last point I'll make on that is, although you think of yourself maybe now as being somebody who wants to focus on sports or where that is, and I mentioned the Sports Business Journal sort of or daily, it was becoming sort of the Bible of what's happening day to day. I get just as much out of reading Ad Age. I get just as much out of reading Progressive Grocer Magazine or Convenience Store News, because those are what other brands are doing to bring brands to life. I'm reading something on the plane the other day about how they're putting, RFID technology in packages of like shampoo, and brands want to track usage behavior. I don't know what the application is for minor league baseball right now today, but I'll tell you what, I'm kind of curious as hell to see what that means and what it can be in the long term. I got a vendor at the trade show here in San Diego who's using military technology of scanners that they want to put woven into the fabric of the jerseys to track where every jersey goes when it comes off the field. And it's supposed to help with authenticity and all those other areas. And the marketer in me starts thinking licensing and applications and hidden messages and sweepstakes and programs. And those are the kind of things where I would just, again, get back to that idea. Be curious. Continue to explore and look at other areas.
I've got one last question for you, and then maybe a summary before we close out. At the end of the day, sports is fun.
Yeah, it is.
Right? What would you say is the most fun part of your career? Is there one moment that you just thought of, like, how in the world did I get here? I can't believe I get paid for it, because I think that's what all the students really aspire to be. Is there something you'd point to, or even just a feeling in your experiences?
Yeah, there's been some of those moments, I think, they happen in your life at times, right? And you certainly pinch yourself once in a while and realize where you are. For everything I talked about and kind of all the aspect of what it takes to sort of get to the end result, I'll give you just two quick examples. One would be very early in my career, I mentioned the BMW side of things. I had the opportunity in Atlanta. I was in the stadium when Michael Johnson had broken the world record of the 200. So I played football, I had run track in high school, etc. Like that moment of where it seemed eerily to get really quiet for like 3 seconds, as everyone just looked at the clock, and it felt like 3 seconds. It was probably a tenth of a second. Yeah. It got super quiet. The gun went off. It got super quiet. He broke the world record. Everyone looked at the clock and flashed the time, and just hearing the stadium erupt. It was just a magical moment to feel like I had nothing to do with that particular moment, but you realize the power that sports has to transcend the world in that moment, in that common goal. And then the thing for me, really getting more to the point of where you are, in minor league baseball in particular, it's really special, is I have the ability to go to a lot of ballparks, and I get to go do a lot of things. And even this season, one particular highlight stands out is I was out in Akron, and Akron has a new name. They're the Rubber Ducks. It's the Akron Rubber Ducks, an only minor league baseball team called the Rubber Ducks. And when I go to ballparks, I try to spend time doing a lot of different things. I talk to their staff and we talk about a lot of things, but I go in the merchandise store and I go in the concession areas. I look at a variety of different things. And I was in the merchandise store, and there was a 70 or 80-year-old gentleman who was there who's worked for the Akron Ducks for probably every year of its existence as a ticket taker. And in Akron, they have a great program where they hand out lapel pins to employees when they do something special. And it's a little rubber duck head. And this guy had 15 of them. And I never saw anybody else have more than one. And I sat back for a second and watched him in this merchandise store. And he walked up to this little boy and just made this boy feel so special in that moment. And that's like you take a step back and you realize that it's a human business, right? And we're about entertainment and escape and what we stand for. And that's by the moments I pinch myself. That night in Akron's a perfect example. I left there and I was out in the concourse to go to the ballpark, right? Yeah. I mean, I work my ass off a lot too, and there's a lot of days in the boardroom, which isn't nearly as fun. But when I'm in that ballpark for that moment and that time, and I look at smiles on faces, there is nothing like being on the other side of the gates when they open at 7 o'clock for fans to come in, and you just see little kids' faces lit up, and all they want is the foam finger, right? And I would just say, again, I said the comment earlier, never lose sight of that. Never lose sight of that if you get in sports that, yes, everyone probably wants to make money and be successful, but the impact you're having for that little window period of time on somebody's life is tremendous, and I take that with me as much as I can.
Yeah, well, great. Well, we can't thank you enough. I know this is an incredibly busy time, for you here at the baseball winter meetings. As I jotted down some notes, I think, the teacher in me, the lessons for the students, things that I heard: push outside of your comfort zone, ask why, be the ingredients of all 5 of those together, and some of the lessons that Michael shared with his career. I think that's the path to feel that Michael Johnson moment, right? That moment that you experienced in Akron. So with that, we're signing off from San Diego. Would you like to give the Ron Burgundy closeout, stay classy line?
Stay classy, San Diego.
All right.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate your time.